Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Disclosure Project. Tonight, think about the last time you stood under the night sky, the moon glowing faintly through drifting clouds. That pale light has watched over every ancestor, every campfire, every whispered story. And yet, the moon is not quite as ordinary as it seems. It's far too large for a planet like ours. It never turns to show its hidden face, and it hangs at just the right distance to create perfect eclipses. Ancient myths even speak of a time before it was there at all, arriving suddenly and changing Earth forever. So pause for a moment and consider this. What if the moon, our most familiar companion, isn't a cosmic accident, but a machine built to watch us? But before we begin, if you find yourself genuinely pulled towards stories of mystery, conspiracy, and forgotten lore, please consider subscribing. And if you truly like tonight's story, a gentle press on the like button goes a long way to keep these journeys coming. Now let's turn our gaze upward once more. Look at the moon and notice how it takes up more sky than it should. For a planet the size of Earth, the companion hanging in our sky is outsized, far larger in scale than we should reasonably expect. Mars has two tiny rocks, lumpy and irregular, closer to captured asteroids than moons. Jupiter has dozens, and Saturn more still, but each orbits a giant many times the bulk of Earth. Against that backdrop, the moon looks less like an accessory and more like an equal partner, immense, steady, and difficult to explain. You're staring at something that doesn't quite follow the same rules every other planet appears to obey. It invites a quiet question. Why is our satellite so unlike the rest? The mathematics feel daunting, but laid out plainly, Earth's moon is close to 1/4 our own planet's size. No other world in the solar system has a match so close in scale. Many dismiss this as a charm of chance, a fluke written into celestial mechanics. Yet when you line the numbers next to each other, the pattern looks peculiar. Our planet is small compared to the sprawling gas giants, but our satellite is massive relative to us. To put it in perspective, if Jupiter's moons obeyed similar proportions, one of them would shine back across its clouds larger than Mercury itself, but none do. Instead, you find bodies reduced to fragments, caught debris or captured wanderers. Earth's moon is different, crafted in balance as if designed for drama. This odd balance weighs heavier when you trace the explanations for its origin. Standard suggestions exist. Perhaps a primordial collision flung material into orbit, and the fragments gathered into a single globe. Others argue capture, a rogue body pulled into Earth's influence long ago. Yet each model stumbles on its own problems. The collision theory predicts specifics in chemical composition that never fully match what Apollo samples returned. The capture idea demands a near-perfect transfer of energy, an event astronomers admit is vanishingly difficult given the equations of orbital dynamics. To this day, no consensus truly satisfies. Unlike Saturn's rings, neatly explained by tidal effects, the moon's birth story remains in contention among scientists, a riddle at every turn. And layered on this natural puzzle, there's a coincidence you can see without telescopes or seismometers. Stand outside during an eclipse. There, in perfect geometry, the moon covers the sun down to its rim, neither too large nor too small. No other world we know produces this spectacle so precisely. The alignment is remarkable because the sun is 400 times wider than the moon, and also about 400 times farther away. Those twin ratios cancel in a synchrony so exact that the disk we see from Earth matches the sun's face edge for edge. The result is a clean blackout, the sky bending into twilight, stars flickering, animals growing uneasy in sudden darkness. If it were smaller, the eclipse would become a halo. If larger, the sun would be blotted bluntly without the fiery crown visible around the edges. Instead, it fits exactly. Coin over coin in the vault of the heavens. Skeptics call it pure luck, the sort of lottery a planet somewhere must eventually win. Supporters of more unusual theories cast it differently, as a stage-light focus pointing earthward, meant to inspire awe, or perhaps to remind us we're being watched. Each perspective finds a foothold. Randomness exists, yet coincidence begins to carry weight when paired with so many other unusual traits. Why has one body managed to capture the gaze of mythology, art and science for all of human history? Why does it command tides, biological rhythms and cycles of life with such precision? The argument is not proof of design, but it does stack strangeness upon strangeness. A simple household comparison captures the scale of its odd fit. Hold out 2 coins at arm's length, a large one pressed close to your eye and a smaller one pushed farther away. Angle them so the discs appear the same size. That is the miracle of the moon. Day after day, orbit after orbit, from rising to setting, the geometry allows an eclipse of perfection. You can reproduce the trick with your coins, but the picture falls apart if you move even a fraction of an inch. Our sky holds that balance without falter. The analogy is humble, but the meaning is stark. The numbers line up with uncanny exactness. Scientists continue to speak of its ambiguity. Even with sophisticated simulations and new data from modern probes, the moon still resists a reliable origin story. With Mars, we look up and see fragments captured, their irregular surfaces plain in telescopic photographs. With the outer planets, we find long chains of icy satellites that likely accreted from the disks of material swirling around the giants. Earth's moon, once again, does not mirror those cases. Its existence is not impossible, but it sits in the slim margins of probability. To many it looks anomalous when weighed against the spread of examples we can measure elsewhere. That strangeness is what invites the suggestion. Perhaps it isn't accidental. Even if we stay grounded, it matters. Civilizations viewed the moon not only as clock and calendar, but as omen and guardian. Farmers followed its phases to track planting cycles. Travellers measured nights by its glinting arc. Lovers, poets, and sailors all lived in its glow. The everyday acts of lighting torches, hauling water, building villages, and standing guard were shaped by the pale globe above. Across centuries, its guidance rules the rhythm of human labour and ritual without fail. Such influence only deepens the question: why does this companion, so tiny against the vastness of the cosmos, exert such outsized impact on Earth and all who live here? Its position is more than an astronomical fact. It is a presence woven into everything from coastal tides to eclipses and myths that shape the boundaries of storytelling itself. You could dismiss each curiosity one by one, the ratio as a rare but natural survivor of chaos, the eclipses as a lucky match of distances, the brightness of its surface as a coincidence of reflective rock. Still, when combined into a single portrait, the picture feels deliberate. A portrait hung straight in a hallway rather than a frame crooked by chance. The moon occupies a sweet spot, balance between cosmic chaos and human imagination, a sentinel that seems impossible to replace if removed. We circle back to strangeness not because each part screams proof, but because the whole arrangement whispers design. And if the whole design whispers, perhaps old voices whispered before us. Stories are layered into human memory far deeper than modern theory. Some ancient accounts hint that the sky once looked unfamiliar, a firmament lit only by stars before a pale intruder arrived. You hear the faint echo of such tales in forgotten texts, passed down through generations that stared upward night after night and felt the shift. If the moon's presence feels uncanny to us now, what did it stir in those who believed they watched it arrive? Perhaps humanity's oldest stories remember that very moment, a time before the moon and a time after, when a new light began to follow every step. Some ancient traditions whisper of a night sky that once had no moon at all, a dome of stars stretching overhead without the familiar glow we take for granted. You stand at a horizon where only the Milky Way throws its silver mist across the night, fires flickering against that vast dark, and the world marked by starlight alone. For many of us, it is difficult to imagine such a past. yet scattered through myth and legend are fragments that seem to recall it. They surface briefly, as though half forgotten, before retreating into the ocean of human memory, and it is here that the first unease enters the story. Was the moon always here, or did it arrive far later than we assume? In Greece, a small tribe called the Arcadians carried a curious name for themselves, the Proselines, meaning before the moon. Their lore claimed that their ancestors lived in a time when the sky held no wandering light after sunset, no pale disk to measure seasons by, only the restless stars. South American stories tell something just as strange, of peoples who remembered how life was governed without a lunar companion, a cycle unmarked by its phases. In Mesopotamia, one of the oldest cradles of writing, fragments survive that speak of a bright one coming late into the heavens, changing the calendar of the gods. These accounts differ in culture, image, and setting, yet all carry a strange resemblance. Each speaks, however faintly, of a world before the moon. The question presses hard when you think of it in practical terms. Human memory is fragile. Even oral traditions, carefully passed down, drift over centuries. How could such tales preserve something so ancient? Critics dismiss them as symbols. Perhaps the Proselines marked themselves as older than neighbouring tribes, crafting a myth around the idea. Perhaps South American narratives of dark sky before the moon were poetic references to hardship or a long winter. Yet those who trust in deeper echoes wonder if these accounts preserve a memory older than written words, a sliver of something carried forward in ritual, chant and symbol, much farther back than our normal history dares allow. To frame the moon as a later arrival is to make it an intruder that changes everything. Picture a hunter setting a snare under a dark sky, no lunar glow to show the path of animals in the dust. Imagine children staring up at countless stars unhindered by the moon's shine, dazzled not by a single globe, but by a river of constellations. Imagine fires lit not to compete with lunar brightness, but as the only measure against pure night. Then comes a change. A white face appears in the sky, foreign yet irresistible. Suddenly fields can be tended by its phase, calendars shaped by its regularity. The intruder becomes regulator, companion, overseer. No wonder then that ancient speech gave it dual roles, both gift and enigma, both guide and question. What unsettles historians is not any single myth, but how multiple sources separated by oceans and cultures seem to carry overlapping memories. Greece remembers the Proselines. South America whispers the old darkness. Mesopotamia writes of an arrival. At first the similarities appear faint, coincidences rising out of metaphor. Yet their persistence, in regions without regular contact, gives pause. Supporters suggest it may point to a shared human memory from deep prehistory, where scattered groups lived under stars alone before a new light claimed dominance in the night sky. Others dismiss the idea, saying psychological archetypes need no shared event to explain their appearance. Both stances have their adherents. Still, the echoes resurface in strange harmony. For those who believe in archetypes, it could be proof of nothing more than humanity's common mind, inventing similar symbols to answer similar mysteries. A people rooted in stars might dream of a day when those stars were undisturbed, and later contrast it with the intrusion of a moon. For others, though, these traditions seem too aligned to ignore. If even shepherds on distant hills and storytellers by unfamiliar rivers carried impressions of a moonless time, then perhaps they were recording not invention but memory. And if so, what memory could reach so far across centuries? Visualize it in daily life for a moment, not in myth, but in muscle and habit. A mason finishing work in a village square might look up at the star-crowded dome rather than a bright companion. A farmer might not rely on lunar phases, but instead track the stars themselves hour by hour. Every rhythm of existence, birth, ritual, harvest, storytelling, would have moved to different measures of time. Then comes night with a luminous intruder leaping into position. Suddenly tides shift, cycles bend, shadows grow longer, animals behave differently. It is not hard to see why ancient myth might embed such a catastrophic, transformative shift, whether literal or symbolic. Skeptics point again to the fragility of memory. They hold that no human story could plausibly carry forward something from eons back, and so the tales must have been metaphors, shaped by culture but not history. To them, the idea that men and women described such events literally is fanciful. But supporters urge a second look. The record of star lore across cultures is deep and precise. Eclipses, strange alignments, comets tracked by careful watchers. If such observations could endure, why not the occasional tale remembering even larger transformations? The pattern tilts in the light, and its meaning sharpens into mystery. What is undeniable is that long before telescopes, long before mathematics gave language to celestial mechanics, people told their children and their poets that the moon came late. Whether meant as symbol or as record, those lines established memory of a dramatic change. And with that, we cannot ignore that something stirred in those tellings across centuries. People believed enough in this memory to mark themselves by it, to shape their identity and their ritual around it, as though the presence of the moon was not only new but world-shifting. So the record may be allegory, or it may be faint history. It may signal collective imagination, or it may be a fragile passing of data across the ages. What matters is that the presence of this narrative exists globally, in faint echo, murmuring of a human rhythm unsettled, interrupted, altered by the ascent of a new light. Whether the moon was gift, omen, or eye in the sky is left to speculation. But that speculation has weight, for it changes how we measure our own history in the cosmos, as one continuity or as something broken and reset by intrusion. If our ancestors sensed such strangeness, we must ask, has our own scientific age ever confirmed their suspicion? Beyond broken myths and scattered lines, has technology caught the same flicker of oddity? That answer begins not in legend, but in the moment astronauts dropped heavy machinery against the lunar surface, waiting to hear what the hidden body beneath us would say. And what they heard was something no celestial body was expected to utter. It was a ringing, a resonance, as though stone itself was hollowed into bell. The moon had answered, and its voice was strange. What happens when you strike the moon? It's not a metaphorical question, but a literal one NASA faced during the Apollo era. Astronauts left behind small seismometers on the lunar surface, upright instruments standing in the dust like silent witnesses. In order to test them, chunks of spacecraft, spent rocket stages, abandoned modules, were intentionally dropped to crash against the lunar ground. These weren't accidents, but deliberate impacts, carefully timed so sensitive machinery would register what happened when an artificial blow echoed through an alien world. Engineers on Earth leaned closer to their headsets, pencils scratching on paper as they waited to see what kind of tremor would come back. The results refused to be ordinary. On Earth, when a similar impact strikes rock, the vibrations fade within minutes. Subterranean fractures absorb the energy, dampening it down into silence. The moon responded otherwise. The hits produced tremors that lasted not minutes but long stretches of time, some reports noting reverberations for nearly an hour. It was as if the lunar crust carried the waves, bouncing them again and again before finally letting go. The sound, translated into numbers, resembled the ringing note of a struck bell. Scientists at NASA even used that phrase in their descriptions, comparing these echoes to the resonance of metal rather than the dull churn of rock. That detail has haunted the imagination ever since. Supporters of unusual theories seized on it immediately, suggesting that such a tone spoke of hollowness under the surface, like striking the walls of an empty vault. Critics replied more cautiously. They argued that the moon's dry, fractured interior, lacking water-rich minerals like Earth's, allows seismic waves to travel farther without interruption. They explained that instead of being dampened by fluids or softer rock, the energy simply rattled back and forth through brittle stone. A practical explanation, certainly, and yet the phrase "rang like a bell" seemed too evocative to fade. It gave texture to an enigma already straining beneath layers of coincidence. In 1970, two Soviet authors, Vassin and Sherbakov, published a bold speculation. The moon might actually be an engineered object, a vast spaceship-like structure disguised by debris and crater dust. According to their proposal, the ringing recorded by Apollo hinted at an inner shell, designed to preserve strength while hollow in bulk. They pictured a world-sized construction drifting into orbit, concealed as a satellite but manufactured with intention. It was not mainstream science, but it entered cultural lore quickly, passed from magazine pages into conferences, whispered television interviews, and dog-eared conspiracy books carried in coat pockets. Hold the image for a moment. A bell tower in a cathedral, a ringer draws the rope. The heavy bronze swings and the after ring floats down through wooden rafters. It begins bold, then stretches on, each note lingering long past when the strike itself has ended. That's the sound the moon seemed to echo, only through stone and regolith instead of bronze. When the Apollo crash tests sent their tremors inward, the lingering vibrations repeated endlessly before finally fading into stillness. Whether hollow chamber or dry rock, the resonance was undeniable, a quality different from everything scientists expected. Engineers measured not only the length of time but peculiar wave patterns, suggesting energies ricocheting through layers, as if the body itself were resonant rather than random. Some compared it to a gong or a drumhead, struck once but still humming long after. For geologists trained on Earth's familiar terrain, it required an entirely different framework to explain. Critics reminded everyone that analogy to bells was never meant literally, yet when you give a mystery a poetic phrase, it tends to stick. The moon rang like a bell, entered both archives and imagination, unshaken even by sober technical clarifications. This moment matters because it transformed myth into measurable oddity. No longer was the moon strange simply for its size or curious origin stories. Now it was proven to behave in a way entirely apart from Earth. Technical explanations were written, yet questions remained. Why does it resonate so cleanly? Why do its tremors last so long? Why does its crust, riddled with craters and fractures, carry the sound so broadly instead of muffling it? These are not certainties but provocations, matters that keep researchers cautious while offering fuel for those who whisper deeper suggestions. To many, the tests serve as hinge points where awe and suspicion touch. To picture technicians listening to hour-long quakes caused by their own discarded equipment is to feel both power and unease. Humanity struck the moon with the weight of our machines and heard back an echo we could not predict. The response stretched beyond numbers. It pressed into our imagination as evidence that our companion was somehow built to respond, that its body was tuned like an instrument. A strange thought, but one hard to dismiss when faced with data that made our nearest neighbour sing. Mainstream voices hold steady. Dry crust, brittle rock, unusual seismic environment. That is explanation enough. There is no need to search for chambers or hidden construction. Skeptics note that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, and this single peculiarity does not rewrite the cosmos. Yet for those inclined to curiosity, the ringing cannot be isolated from the broader pattern. A giant moon, unlike others, coincidences of size and placement, myths of a world before its appearance, and now the spectral voice of bell tones reverberating through hollow speculation. One mystery folds seamlessly into another. Supporters push further, suggesting that if the moon ever was engineered, acoustic qualities might serve as part of its function. A resonant body could help regulate tides, stabilizing Earth's wobble, keeping climates in balance for fragile biology. The ringing then would not simply be quirk but signature, the trace of design hidden within stone. Whether one entertains this for curiosity or disregards it as fanciful, it carries a heavy weight of possibility. These conversations remind us that the moon is less a solved equation than an ongoing puzzle framed against our sky each night. Even if nothing artificial hides inside, the outcome still unsettles. A world hit by human hands sang back in endurance, refusing to follow expected patterns. The tremors lasted longer, stretched farther, returned richer resonance than models predicted. It proves that the moon is unlike Earth, not simply in surface but in core identity. And if strangeness arises inside, it raises new suspicion about surfaces we cannot reach. What textures, forms, or signs might hide where no earthbound eye has ever looked long enough? The far side of the moon, locked forever away from naked view, holds terraced ridges and deep basins shielded from our gaze. Spacecraft have sent photographs, yet for decades speculation has clung to whispers of anomalies. If the moon's body resonates as no other, perhaps its face turned away conceals design written in stone. Some say structures, some say shadows playing tricks, others say pure imagination. Still, the unseen side waits. Because beyond ringing tremors and laboratory explanations lies that hidden hemisphere, which to this day no one watches except by machine. If the interior of the moon raises suspicion, then it is only natural to turn the question outward. What has always lingered beyond sight? What forms rise on the ground that human eyes never quite meet? The far side hides from us always, and some insist it hides far more than rock. But the echo of that first impact was not the end of the story. For years after, the moon was still listened to, as if the bell might toll again. Sensitive instruments, planted in its dust, kept there. You picture the scene in 1969, two astronauts unfolding a package from its foil wrapping, not food or tools, but an instrument meant to eavesdrop on the body beneath their boots. They set it down gently in the dust, brushed it free of clinging grit and angled its panels toward Earth. That little device, a seismometer, became one of the quietest microphones ever planted, listening not for voices but for the moon's heartbeat. And it did hear one, except it didn't sound like a pulse. It sounded like something struck too hard, reverberating long after the blow. On Earth, quakes rattle for minutes. Soil and water dampen the shock, absorb the energy, and hush the vibration. A strong quake may last 10 minutes, perhaps 15, before the ground gives up its tension. But when the moon was struck by rocket boosters deliberately crashed, or by natural meteorites, the tremors didn't fade in a quarter hour. They stretched for close to an hour, sometimes more. The moon did not tremble and then settle. It quivered and carried the blow around and around, unwilling to let it go. Apollo 12's booster crash in 1969 sent vibrations travelling for nearly an hour. Apollo 13's stage, when it impacted, kept the tremors alive for well over 3. That was not a normal planet's response. It was closer to what you would hear if you dropped a hammer on a hollow metal sphere. Scientists at Mission Control were puzzled. At first, they blamed the dryness of lunar rock. No water to cushion the blow. Then they considered the lack of atmosphere. No air to carry away the energy. Both were true. And yet, the scale of the resonance seemed excessive, almost theatrical. NASA reports noted the surprise with clinical restraint, but even in those documents, the phrase slipped in. The moon rang like a bell. Once said, it could not be unsaid. For years, those seismometers kept working. Apollo 14, 15, 16, 17, each added another ear to the network listening to the moon. They picked up shallow quakes from meteoroid strikes, thermal quakes as the crust expanded in sunlight, and deep quakes rising hundreds of miles below, the last the most unsettling of all. Those deep events weren't violent, but they were regular. They came in clusters, and unlike earthquakes, they didn't trace neat lines of tectonic plates. They came from a body that, officially, had no such plates at all. Imagine being the technician tasked with plotting those readings. You sit at a desk in Houston, pencil scratching across graph paper, the ink making a staircase of pulses. One quake should slope down quickly, yet the moon's line runs on, smaller but still present, refusing to fade. You glance at the clock. 10 minutes, 20, 30. The needle still shivers. You wonder if your machine is malfunctioning, but then another sight confirms it. The moon is still quivering long after it should be silent. The oddity of those deep quakes opened doors to speculation. Some whispered that the moon's crust might be unnaturally thick in places, its mantle oddly uniform as if engineered. Others suggested that caverns or voids inside allowed vibrations to travel without interruption, like sound in a cathedral. Skeptics countered that the moon is simply a world frozen in a way Earth is not, a world without tectonics, so quakes have nowhere to go. But the imagery was too rich to ignore. Seismographs became not just science, but poetry, a world that responds to impact not with violence, but with music. As the Apollo era wound down, those instruments were left behind, still listening. Some transmitted for years. Their quiet data piles up even now in archives, available for anyone with patience to sift. But the public rarely sees it. The phrase lingers instead. The moon rang like a bell. Whether or not the metaphor is perfect, it became the headline, and once again, the moon was a performer, not a passive stone. It gripped because it blurred the line between world and artifact. A rock should not sound musical, yet here was our nearest neighbour, turning impacts into tones, holding them longer than seemed natural. Even NASA scientists admitted surprise, and in that gap between science and expectation, myth slid back in. Bells call us to gather. Bells toll warnings. Bells mark the passage of time. To say the moon rang like a bell is to imagine it sending out a message. We just don't yet know the language. The moon did not behave like solid rock nor like liquid earth. It behaved like something in between, as if hiding a design within. No wonder myths never called it silent stone, but something alive enough to answer. If seismic echoes hinted that the moon carried its weight strangely, another anomaly came from above. Orbit itself. When satellites first looped around the moon in the late 1960s, engineers expected smooth paths. Orbital mechanics is supposed to be predictable. Draw the mass, do the math, trace the curve. But the early lunar orbiter missions behaved oddly. Instead of following steady arcs, their paths shifted, tugged as if by hidden hands. Small deviations at first, then larger ones, enough to threaten crashes if not corrected. Controllers recalculated, checked equipment, reran simulations. The culprit turned out not to be malfunction, but the moon itself. Beneath certain basins, Mare Imbrium, Mare Serenitatis, Mare Orientale, lurked invisible concentrations of mass. These anomalies, dubbed Mascons, short for mass concentrations, pulled at orbiting spacecraft like magnets under a table. Invisible, silent, but undeniable, they revealed the moon's interior was not uniform. Imagine the confusion in mission control. Engineers huddled around printouts, plotting trajectories by hand, watching a line that should stay neat begin to bow. A satellite meant to skim serenely over Mare Imbrium dips low, its orbit tightening. The numbers don't lie, but they don't make sense. How can gravity be this lumpy? Geologists explained Mascons as dense basalt filling ancient impact scars. Plausible, yes. But why should the hidden weights sit so neatly beneath the basins? And why do some pull hard enough to drag satellites down while others remain quiet? Some whispered of another possibility. What if the Mascons were not accidents but ballast? Machines use counterweights to stay balanced. Architects bury anchors to hold structures steady. Perhaps the moon's hidden weight served a similar purpose, keeping one face fixed toward Earth, timing its pull with our tides. Critics counter this as reading too much into natural geology. Impact melts, denser minerals, mantle upwelling. These are plausible, testable causes. Yet the metaphor is hard to ignore. The moon's gravity, far from smooth, is patterned, as if it bears the fingerprints of intention. The anomalies became more than academic. In 1968, Lunar Orbiter 5's mission was nearly compromised by unexpected orbital decay. Later, Apollo navigation had to account for Mascons carefully to avoid errors. Astronauts flying around the moon relied on numbers that sometimes seemed to shift under their feet. One Apollo pilot later admitted, "It felt like the moon didn't want us where we thought we'd be." Decades later, the mystery deepened. In 2011, NASA's Grail mission, twin probes named Ebb and Flow, mapped the moon's gravitational field with exquisite detail. What they found confirmed Mascons were real, dense, and bizarrely concentrated. Their maps looked like pressure points on a body, bright and dark regions showing where gravity pressed harder or looser than it should. The moon, far from uniform, was patchworked, stitched together with seams no one had predicted. Picture those maps spread across a screen. A sphere you thought was steady revealed instead as mottled, streaked with hidden structure. It looks less like a simple rock, more like something assembled, braced, weighted in places for reasons we don't fully understand. Engineers smile politely and explain with geology. Conspiracy theorists lean in and whisper ballast, framework, structure. Which story you accept depends on your taste for wonder, but either way, the moon does not pull evenly. Its gravity betrays complexity, the kind that makes orbits dip, trajectories bend, and satellites fall from paths they should have held. Consider this. If you were designing a watcher, a sentinel to hold position for billions of years, you would not leave its orbit to chance. You would weight it carefully, ballast hidden inside so it always turned one face toward Earth and never drifted free. To ancient eyes, that bending of rules was not physics but personality. The moon pulled strangely because it wanted to, and across cultures, no one spoke of it as stone. They spoke of it as someone watching. You stand beneath a sky that has no electricity, no telescopes, no satellites, only a fire at your feet and the wide night above. In such a world, the moon is not background, it is presence. It shifts in brightness, disappears, reappears, and seems to follow wherever you walk. In this older imagination, it is always alive, a face, a god, a companion, sometimes a trickster. Across continents, stories rise with the moon and refuse to set. Among the Norse, the moon was Mani, a god who drove a chariot across the sky. Wolves chased him endlessly, their snapping jaws responsible for eclipses when they caught him in their bite. For Vikings, the moon was not steady or safe. It was hunted, pursued, alive in struggle. Notice how this reframes our scientific awe. Where we marvel at how constant the moon's orbit is, they saw instead its fragility, its danger. Picture a longhouse in winter. Smoke rises through the roof. Children sit by the fire as an elder tells them to look for the wolves during the next eclipse. "They almost have him," the voice says. "If he disappears, the world will freeze." A god bound to the sky kept the community alert, watching. In Hindu tradition, the moon was Chandra, also called Soma, a figure tied to fertility, cycles, and intoxicating drink. Where the Norse saw pursuit, India saw renewal. Soma waxes and wanes, drinking the nectar of immortality until he swells, then thinning again as the gods take their share. Rituals timed to lunar phases guided planting, fasting, feasting. The moon here was a calendar, not just a light. But even calendars carried suspicion. One Purana describes Soma abducting a teacher's wife, punished by waning, restored only when others interceded. The moon was moral, flawed, bound to story. To follow it was not just to mark time, but to learn consequence. Imagine a temple courtyard glowing with oil lamps, priests chanting under the full moon. Families whisper prayers not only for crops but for forgiveness. The moon was both a clock and a mirror of human failings, swelling and fading like our own fortunes. In Chinese story, it was Chang'e, who drank an elixir and floated upward, trapped forever in lunar exile. Beside her is a rabbit, endlessly pounding medicine with a pestle. Together they turn the cold disk above into a place of longing, regret, and unreachable immortality. During mid-autumn festivals, families look upward and tell a story while sharing mooncakes. Imagine standing in a courtyard lit by lanterns, a grandmother pointing to the pale markings on the lunar face. "There," she says, "that shadow is the rabbit. He's still at work." The moon becomes home to someone, not something, a permanent witness to human ritual. In West Africa, the Dogon people of Mali carried stories that tied the moon to Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. Their cosmology spoke of invisible companions, unseen until modern telescopes confirmed Sirius B scholars still debate how such knowledge came. Some argue outside contact, others misinterpretation, and the moon, in their telling, was never alone in the sky. It joined that dialogue with Sirius, linked in a web of watchers trading secrets across darkness. Imagine a desert night with drums in the distance, stars spread thick across the black. A storyteller gestures upward, not just at the obvious moon, but at Sirius twinkling nearby, weaving them together in a fabric of meaning. Even before radio telescopes, the sense was clear. The sky was not silent. It spoke. In the Aztec world, the moon was Coyolxauhqui, a goddess dismembered by her brother Huitzilopochtli, her scattered pieces cast across the sky. The round, glowing disk became both wound and remembrance. Elsewhere in the Americas, the moon often appeared as a trickster, jealous of the sun's brightness, shifting shape, stealing attention. Picture a ritual in Tenochtitlan, drums pounding, warriors painted in blue and black, retelling the story of Coyolxauhqui's defeat as the moon rises blood-red through volcanic haze. The body in the sky was not background, it was narrative incarnate, carrying the memory of violence and power. Why so many faces? The simple answer is motion. The moon waxes, wanes, vanishes, returns. Transformation always invites story. The harder answer is that maybe people sensed something we overlook, that its strangeness, its size, its orbit, its resonance, its lumpy gravity, begged to be explained in story long before equations tried. Notice also how many of these myths place the moon in a role of watcher. Mani chased, Chandra judging, Chang'e imprisoned, Coyolxauhqui wounded, all eyes, all presence, all fixed above. None of these cultures treated it as inert. They assumed it saw. Even today our language betrays us. We speak of the man in the moon, of the moon following us down the road. Children instinctively wave at it, some whisper to it as though it listens. Even with science, that old sense persists. Imagine the Apollo astronaut, gazing back at Earthrise while standing on that myth-soaked dust. He knows the science, he knows the equations, yet he cannot avoid the weight of millennia pressing in. Footprints on a body once called God, trickster, exile. A being that people prayed to, feared, worshipped. In that moment, he's not just a pilot. He is part of the longest conversation humans have ever had. A dialogue with the moon itself. So whether through wolves or rabbits, nectar or exile, trickery or pursuit, cultures across the globe built stories to make sense of the moon's uncanny nature. None saw it as silent, none as empty. All treated it as a presence. If Mascons reveal a lumpy pull on orbit, myths reveal the same in imagination. A pull on the human mind that refuses to flatten. These myths scatter like seeds across the world. China, India, the Arctic, the Andes. Yet when astronauts left footprints in dust, the myths weren't gone. They were waiting, folded into the silence of the comms and the photographs we still struggle to interpret. When Apollo ended, many assumed the moon had been conquered, its mysteries catalogued and shelved. 12 men walked, scooped, photographed, and left. The program closed. Budgets shifted. Space seemed to move outward, toward Mars, toward Voyager's cameras, away from the body closest to us. But the moon never went quiet. In fact, no other world has been studied more obsessively. Dozens of missions, probes, rovers, orbiters, all sent to map every crater, scan every ridge, weigh every anomaly. From the 1990s Clementine orbiter to the modern Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, the moon has been imaged in almost absurd detail. If Earth's entire surface were mapped at the same resolution, you could see a picnic blanket laid out in a city park. And yet the more the pixels sharpened, the less the picture seemed to yield. More detail, but less certainty. LRO has circled since 2009, sending back terabytes of images. Officially, it's a triumph. Gigantic mosaics show every scar of impact, every slope and boulder. Craters are catalogued, ridges measured, potential landing sites plotted with precision. But ordinary people can't see all of it. The data is vast, unwieldy, and requires special software. What filters into public view is curated. A handful of panoramas, a few zooms on Apollo landing sites, an occasional press release. For the rest, the blankness stretches. Observers note blurred patches, compression oddities, shadows that look engineered. NASA points to stitching artifacts and bandwidth limits. Perhaps that's all it is. Yet the effect is the same. A map too detailed to grasp, still missing pieces where your eyes most want to linger. Imagine scrolling through an endless digital atlas, each click revealing more craters, more monotony. The sheer volume of detail numbs rather than enlightens. Instead of shrinking into comprehension, the moon expands into a mystery so large you cannot hold it. More pixels but less certainty. While American probes circled, China went further. The Chang'e program, named for the moon goddess herself, landed on the near side, then sent Chang'e 4 to the far side in 2019, the first in history. A small rover, U-22, trundled out into a landscape no human eye had seen directly. Early reports mentioned something curious, a gel-like material in a small crater, darker and shinier than the soil around it. The phrase lit up the internet. Later, analysis suggested melted rock from an impact. But the wording, gel-like, unusual, stayed lodged in the imagination. Symbolically, it felt like myth bleeding into a lab note. This side we never see yields something slippery and poorly explained. The far side, once myth, now a riddle written in dust. China's missions continue. Samples returned, more planned, yet little filters westward in real time. Language, geopolitics, and tightly managed communications leave fragments. Once again, the moon speaks, but through pauses as much as words. India's Chandrayaan missions mapped water ice in permanently shadowed craters near the poles, hidden reserves that could one day support colonies. Japan's Kaguya orbiter sent back high-definition videos of Earth rising over the lunar horizon, so clean they looked staged. Each nation added a layer, and each layer, in its own way, deepened the mystery. Water where none was expected. Rocks that shine oddly. Images sometimes too perfect to trust, sometimes too imperfect to decode. Every nation adds clarity, and every addition deepens the mystery. Meanwhile, Apollo's record remains the backbone of lunar history, and still, its gaps speak the loudest. The transcripts exist, but are full of clipped phrases and sudden switches. At times, a voice falters mid-thought and returns on a different line, tidy as if nothing strange had brushed the edge of it. Not a smoking gun, more an atmosphere of a mission. Picture mission control, rows of consoles glowing in half-light, coffee cooling in paper cups, every ear tuned to distant voices. Routine checks flow, navigation updates, then a sudden break. Not a fade, but a switch. Technicians glance up, fingers tapping dials. A minute stretches, then the channel returns, tidy and calm. The record looks whole again, except it isn't. Not to anyone who heard that lapse. Official explanations make sense. The spacecraft slipped behind the moon. Ground stations missed a handoff. Equipment hiccuped, as it often did. All true. And yet, for those listening carefully, timing itself can feel like a tell. The lines seem to prefer dropping at the most charged moments. It doesn't matter whether you think those pauses hid anomalies or not. What matters is the atmosphere they left. The sense that not every sentence made the same journey from space to tape. Where the record breaks, imagination takes its place, and this is the paradox. We have more information about the moon than ever. Thousands of hours of recordings, millions of images, seismographs, gravimeters, spectrometers, laser altimeters, an archive so huge no single mind can carry it. And yet, the more we gather, the less certain we feel. Detail blurs into noise. The lapses in the record loom larger than the record itself. Myths once told by firelight now echo inside server rooms. Instead of banishing wonder, the flood of data resurrects it. Sometimes abundance behaves like absence. Step back from the numbers and the pixels. The moon we thought Apollo tamed has only grown more elusive. It sits there, mapped in precision, yet blurred where we most want clarity. It yields gel in a crater, water in shadow, orbits tugged by hidden weights. Each answer births other questions. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the moon was never meant to be summed, only approached in layers. Each era builds its own set of signs, walls by firelight, gel on a rover's log. The watcher remains, quiet not because it has nothing to say, but because it never says enough. For centuries, the moon has hidden its face in different ways. Modern missions bury us in pixels until patterns blur. Earlier ages caught only glimpses, fleeting sparks, sudden colours, notes in the margins of observatory journals. Whether through the flood of too much data or the hush of a single unexplained flash, the effect is the same. The moon resists being pinned down, and so we move from the silence of modern instruments to the fragile testimony of older eyes, when a momentary glow on lunar soil was enough to shake the certainty of stone. Long before rockets traced white curls across the upper air, eyes and lenses had already turned skyward. The moon, reliable in its glow, seemed steady, yet not always. Across centuries, careful observers described brief glimmers that did not belong. Fleeting stains of light would rise on the lunar surface, shimmer for seconds or minutes, and then vanish without trace. Through refracting telescopes and even naked eyes in dark country hills, witnesses told of the moon flickering like a lantern interrupted by hidden sparks. To stand at an observatory window, glass cool to the touch, and see a sudden flash on a crater wall was to feel that the moon was alive in quiet ways. These moments wove themselves into astronomy's long notebooks under the name Transient Lunar Phenomena. The phrase sounds clinical, but its records are anything but. Take the 18th century. Astronomers, often clergymen or university scribes, wrote with steady pens by lamplight as they described red glows painting a patch of lunar soil for several minutes. They did not grandstand or exaggerate. They marked them down with the same gravity as star charts. Some of these men remained silent in public, worried such mentions would stain reputations they built on restraint. Yet the private logs show hesitation paired with awe, a faint flash, a coloured haze, a veil creeping along a ridge. These were not easily waved away. A person can imagine the beat of his hand as he steadied the pen, uncertain whether to ink what seemed so improbable. And these reports stretch across generations. In later centuries, a haze like smoke was noted covering parts of the surface for brief instants, as if dust swelled up from nowhere. Others saw quick sparks like invisible matches struck near crater edges. The 20th century saw plenty of these logs as well. Observers at modern instruments recorded colour shifts, green, blue, scarlet, dimming as quickly as they appeared. Such records reached into official catalogues, cementing them as anomalies of note. Somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 potential cases have been reported through history. Some lasted moments, some half an hour, but always brief enough to fade before instruments could focus. The ordinary explanations are simple, if unsatisfying. Perhaps a meteor struck just as the telescope's eye happened to be watching, releasing a faint glow of heat or dust cloud, soft in colour but striking against silvery ground. Perhaps gas pockets trapped in the moon's crust bled out briefly, a kind of volcanic whisper long after major eruptions ceased. Other scientists suggested electrical disturbances between solar wind and lunar dust, small static charges glowing against the vacuum, all plausible and all scattered without consensus. None explain the persistence of centuries of reports from different continents and different generations that repeat the same fleeting script of light and haze. Yet suspicions rise again when these natural causes do not quite match the more unusual reports. Some whisper that such glows hinted at machinery buried beneath, lights leaking through fault lines, not random sparks of stone. Lunar transient phenomena, under this view, are not geological accidents but surface activity from something hidden. Maintenance, perhaps, or energy release from structures that we are not meant to see. There is no proof of such an idea, only resonance with older questions. If the moon seemed too large, too precise in orbit, too resonant when struck, then why would faint surface lights not be part of the same pattern? We must return to the human watchers to hold perspective steady. Picture a night in 1788, a quiet observatory in Central Europe. A scholar leans near his telescope, breath cloud in the chill, notes by his candle dim. He observes a steady region of the moon's floor when, in his own words, a dazzling crimson flash blooms and vanishes. He lowers his hand, pausing mid-script as ink dries on the quill's tip. Should he enter what he saw, knowing colleagues might hear and mock weakness of vision? Or keep it to himself, a private reminder that not all patterns yield to math yet? Moments like this remind us that even at its most clinical, the act of observation is human, fragile, hesitant. Through these glimpses we see the moon not as dead rock, but as a body that still startles. Consider also that many reported events were witnessed by more than one person at different stations, reducing the odds of hallucination or faulty lens. A red flare seen in London might be matched by a brief letter from Paris that very night. Patterns echo across distance. Supporters suggest this collective validation grants weight to the phenomena, while critics counter that human sight is easily misled, especially when strained at dim twilight thresholds through early telescopes. The debate has never quite settled. The strain continues even now. Modern missions with cameras and orbiters set out to record transient lunar events, but almost no program has caught them cleanly. Technology is advanced, resolution superb, yet the moon seldom repeats its old tricks under direct surveillance. To skeptics, this is proof they never existed in the first place. Illusions propped up by faulty glass and suggestible minds. But to believers, the rarity is inherent. They occur rarely, unpredictably, and vanish too quickly to capture, like lightning hidden behind faraway mountains. The pattern holds its mystery by escaping measurement. Astronomers classified and compiled hundreds of entries into dedicated catalogues, treating them not as evidence or fantasy, but as irregular data points. These documents rest in quiet libraries now, but they remind us of an age when simple human eye and hand bore witness. The glow, the haze, and the occasional electric flare each join into the long list of things that suggest the moon is less still than it appears. The official category itself, Transient Lunar Phenomena, signals acceptance that something does sometimes flicker, even if no one agrees why. When weighed against the whole portrait of lunar riddles, the glows sit uneasily. Perhaps the surface responds to quakes deep inside, shaking loose dust that reflects sunlight strange. Perhaps micrometeorites hammer its ground so often that some just happen to coincide with a telescope's gaze. Or perhaps, as conspiracists propose, the moon at times shows evidence of movement beneath, systems or machines dormant until they stir briefly and leave a faint mark of illumination. These interpretations remain speculative, but the endurance of the record keeps them vivid. If nothing else, TLPS remind us of the universal human instinct to record what unsettles the eye. Across centuries, across language, people saw light where there should have been none, and they wrote it down. The quiet lesson is that the moon has never been entirely silent. In flashes, even if unexplained, it still whispers across time. The glow of those old observations endures, like embers glowing low under ashes, for anyone still willing to search. If nothing else, TLPS remind us of a universal reflex. When the sky misbehaves, we write it down. Across languages and centuries, people saw light where there should have been none, and they set it to paper. The embers of those notes still glow in archives, waiting for anyone willing to look. And if the surface can flash and fade before our eyes, what about the half we could not see at all? For most of history, the moon kept one face turned toward us, and the other turned away, a permanent blind side. When probes finally photographed that hidden hemisphere, some swore the shadows there didn't fall like accidents. If the old lights hint at activity, the far side invites a harder question. Are there shapes in that darkness that aren't entirely the work of chance? The far side of the moon was once nothing more than imagination. For most of human history, only one face ever greeted Earth, the other locked away beyond view. That hidden half belonged to the realm of dreams and myths until mid-20th century probes finally traced arcs around the globe and sent images home. The first photographs arrived grainy, grey and limited, but to eyes accustomed to a smooth cratered plane, they carried something unsettling. Some claimed strange shapes rose there, not random hills or shattered ridges, but forms that suggested arrangement. Lines, angles, the marks of geometry rather than chaos. Even in black and white, the far side seemed to hum with questions that the near side never quite raised. What drew attention most were spires standing sharper than expected, outlined by long shadows that rose across ridged floors. They stretched far taller than the craters that surrounded them, narrow enough that they cast exaggerated silhouettes in the thin sunlight. Along with them appeared terraces that resembled steps carved into slopes, as if someone had pressed deliberate lines into basalt cliffs. In some photos, walls seemed to meet at right angles with surprising precision, box shadows cutting dark grids against pale dust. These were small in scale when compared with natural landforms, yet their shapes stood out cleanly in ways that random impact usually fails to produce. Such sights sparked long conversations. Were they tricks of light, dust and optics, or structures carved by intention? Among the reported anomalies, two sets became fixtures in whispered discussion. The so-called Blair cuspids appeared first in a handful of mid-century images, 6 or 7 upright features arranged with uncanny regularity. They stood like a group of monuments, evenly spaced, the kind of pattern usually seen in temples or fields of stone rather than scattered geological debris. Critics argued they were nothing more than boulders lit at odd angle. Still, the symmetry unsettled watchers. The second case was the lunar ziggurat, an angular raised form seen in low-resolution pictures from the far side. Its stepped appearance reminded some of Mesopotamian temples, with layers rising tier by tier. To skeptics, it was the mind playing games with shadows, familiar forms projected onto chance ridges. Yet once noticed, such features are difficult to unsee. Rumours expanded as spacefaring nations extended their reach. Some accounts suggested that both Soviet and later Chinese missions spotted anomalies richer than the public images allowed. Geometric arrangements, lights, even stark vertical towers were whispered to have been captured on classified reels of film. According to these tales, only a fraction of the material was ever released in official archives, while the rest remained stored, hidden or destroyed. The gaps in record, whether innocent or not, only added fuel. People called to mind other eras when governments concealed uncomfortable discoveries. If entire probes had returned views unlike any known geology, would they risk both panic and embarrassment by revealing them outright? Supporters of such claims insist the omissions were too neat to be coincidence. Visual metaphors help frame what observers believe they saw. Picture standing on an empty desert plain, convinced all around are dunes and rock. Then the sun shifts and shadows fall in thick lines. Suddenly right angles leap out, unmistakable and defiant. The impression is no longer one of random scatter, but of deliberate foundation. The far side's strange shadows work much the same way. Tall spikes produce straight darkness across long stretches of dust. Horizontal ridges suddenly combine with vertical striations to mimic walls, terraces, even roofs. To seasoned geologists, lens flare and chance alignment provide explanation. To those with curious eyes, the impression of design refuses to fade. NASA and other agencies have released official responses over the years. Their stance is steady. Photographic anomalies belong to the limitations of cameras, low sun angles, or artifacts of processing. Long shadows stretch natural features in deceptive ways, turning a boulder into a spire or three aligned craters into neat rows. Terrain viewed at low resolution magnifies illusion, especially if images are studied with expectation. Skeptics emphasize that human brains are built for pattern recognition. Faces are seen in clouds and animals in constellations. Why expect any different when staring at tiny grey pixels? To them, nothing more exists on the far side than dust, rock, and scars of impacts layered across billions of years. And yet the arguments never end because patterns, even imagined, sway people deeply. The far side remains the only major near-world surface humanity has not walked upon. That distance allows doubt to thrive. Whether or not the anomalies are illusions, to many the pictures look engineered. Rows, steps, towers, nature makes them rarely. Human eyes and instincts, trained by life mid-architecture and order, grasp for purpose at every whiff of symmetry. It is easy to understand why someone sifting through lunar catalogues late at night, magnifying glass in hand, might find hints of monuments left behind. They might not trust the dismissals offered in press releases. For a moment, shift focus to a human scene. Imagine a technician in the Soviet Union, hunched over a tray of negatives just returned from orbit. His fingers leave faint oil marks as he holds a film strip toward desk light. There, tiny specks line up impossibly straight against crater floor. He rubs his eyes, stares again. Should he mention it to a supervisor? Should he log it as camera flaw? Outside in the corridor, men pace between filing cabinets, anxious that every discovery fit political and scientific expectation. In an era taught with secrecy, even deciding what to acknowledge carried risks. Stories like this, whether entirely factual or ornamental, remind us that the filtering of data always rests in human hands. Supporters of more speculative theories gather these details to build a case. The moon's far side was never meant to be naturally bare. They suggest it shelters structures weathered by time, cloaked by dust, their function unknown. Perhaps they are ruins from older civilizations, perhaps machinery waiting in standby. Others expand the theory further, pointing to cooperation between rival nations who might quietly agree to keep such knowledge suppressed. To them, the presence of structures explains why the far side has never become a focus for crewed missions, why research shifts instead toward a resource mapping that conveniently skirts anomalies. Critics, on the other hand, remind us that every supposed structure falls apart at higher resolution. The Blair cuspids, when revisited by later imagery, appear to flatten into ordinary rocks. The ziggurat, once viewed with modern cameras, becomes an arrangement of ridges utterly geologic. For them, illusions not only explain past claims, but reveal how easily human longing for meaning drives imagination. Why assume hidden bases when history shows pattern seeking everywhere, from faces in cliffs to animals in stars? Still, one thing remains constant. The far side carries a reputation of concealment that no clarity seems to erase. Its distance, its blindness to Earth, its delayed unveiling by probes, all combine to leave it stamped with aura of secrecy. Even if every anomaly could be explained away, the sense lingers that something unnatural waits there, just beyond common eyes. It is that sense, not the pixels themselves, that gives the structures their weight. The far side becomes a blank page for projection, a canvas where suspicion paints geometry onto terrain. To many who have studied the photographs, the impression is difficult to escape. The farther you look, the more hints emerge: straight edges, towers, lingering spires. If nothing else, the far side shows how perception alone can make wilderness look deliberate. But to some, perception and reality blur together. It is one thing to see what the brain wants. It is another when astronauts themselves return talking about lights and forms without intermediary lenses, and that is where whispers grow loudest. Because if certain crews who orbited the moon witnessed things with mortal eyes, not cameras, then any debate about illusion or artifact must pause. Rumours heat when word comes not from film or grainy negatives, but from those strapped into capsules, drifting in lunar orbit, staring outward with no filter between skin and sky. The far side photographs may be debated endlessly. What remains anchored is testimony from those who actually went there. What did they describe? Shapes flickering outside windows, glowing lights in the darkness beyond, movements that refused easy explanations. The far side's photographs might be contested pixel by pixel, but first-hand accounts stand harder to erase. And those accounts raise sharper questions. What did witnesses orbiting the moon actually say when nothing stood between their eyes and the truth? Photographs can be debated pixel by pixel. A human voice describing lights outside a window is harder to sand smooth. Picture the Apollo capsule drifting in the soft curve of lunar orbit, its panels catching faint arcs of sunlight as the rest of the cabin swims in darkness. Outside the small circular windows, the void presses close. The only sound inside is the muted hiss of systems and the clipped chatter of headsets. Then, unexpectedly, something outside flickers. A stern flash against the black, brighter than a reflection yet vanishing too quick for certainty. One astronaut leans closer to the glass, pressing his helmeted head against the padding. Did the surface below just blink? Or did something move just beyond the shadow of the hull? In that moment, every trained habit of explanation, loose wires, sparks from the ship's panels, distant particles, rattles into play. Yet the unease lingers, persistent, magnetic. These reports, scattered across missions, hold consistent details, quick bursts of light and unfamiliar forms gliding around the craft. Transcripts show astronauts recording odd glows, hesitant in their tone, then steering the words back to safer ground when silence grows heavy. Some question whether the crew doubted their own perception, knowing how fragile reputation could be if they spoke too freely. Others suggest their restraint was born from direct instructions. Note what you see, but keep the strangest parts muted. Official accounts often catalogue these experiences as reflections from windows, cosmic rays striking the eyes, or flares of static across the panels. Each explanation is plausible. None fully erases the memory of light playing silently in a place without air. A famous point of contention lies with Buzz Aldrin. While in space, he later described how he and his colleagues saw something pacing them at a distance, visible as a moving light. Explanations range from a detached panel to fragments of equipment that had ejected during staging. Aldrin's phrasing, that the light seemed to follow the craft, fed decades of speculation, interpreted by some as sign of another vehicle observing their fragile capsule. For critics, this remains an open and shut case of misunderstood debris, but that simple answer cannot erase the atmosphere surrounding his words, the impression that the craft was not alone against the stars. Even stranger are claims tied to Neil Armstrong's first mission to the lunar surface. Some sources whisper that during moments of interrupted radio communication, he spoke of large craft stationed beyond the edge of a crater, watching silently from their positions. Details vary, some calling them enormous disks, others describing lines of glowing forms. NASA never released such transcripts, and the official record denies any such event, dismissing it as rumour layered on top of legendary moments. Yet the idea persists, carried forward in interviews, fringe publications and speculative documentaries. Supporters suggest his hesitation to speak openly in later years hints at a deeper memory, while critics stress the hazards of hearsay. Here lies the tension. Official statements pin the lights on known causes, sunlight glinting off moving debris, cosmic radiation striking against an astronaut's eye, producing phantom flashes, technical glitches scattering sparks across electrical systems. Each of those has firm foundation, repeatable on later missions. Yet stacked against them are whispered testimonies that seem less easily collapsed into physics. When men describe not random signs but forms moving with intent, matching orbit, or gleaming at consistent points over hours, it suggests something heavier than passing space junk. Critics counter that the environment in space is uniquely demanding, illusions easy to conjure under strain. Still, the unease of the accounts remains. Consider the human moment itself. A man strapped into a chair for days, with instruments humming endlessly at his side, finally sees something shift in the corner of his vision. He knows the world on Earth waits for perfection, silence, control. He weighs whether to record the anomaly or remain silent. In some cases, he whispers into the microphone, "I see a light." In others, he says nothing, perhaps confiding only once back on Earth, or never at all. That hesitation becomes part of the story, reminding us that records are not only what is written, but also what is withheld. Across later missions, more reports surfaced. Flashes traversing the black beyond the hull, shapes caught during brief orbits over the far side, where no direct communication reached Earth. Transcripts show clipped remarks, sudden pauses, quick laughter that masks a tinge of unease. These fragments leave researchers in awkward balance. Do we treat them as coincidences piled on natural explanations, or as hints of something unacknowledged? For scientists, cautious restraint rules the day. For believers, patterns grow obvious in their repetition. The capsule drifts, the crew sees lights, official channels deny. It repeats often enough to feel rehearsed. NASA's denials are steady. No foreign craft observed, no anomalies hidden, no cover-ups left in dusty archives. Yet leaked or whispered testimonies continue to surface, trickling through memoirs, alternative publications, and accounts passed at conferences in muted corners. Supporters claim this tension itself proves concealment. If explanations were so ordinary, why cut broadcasts? Why silence crew mid-description? Critics strike back, noting technical failures plagued early systems, and correlation should not imply conspiracy. The dialogue goes in circles, but what does not dissipate is the imagery. Astronauts, encased in fragile machines, whispering about shapes that should not be there. The mini payoff here is simple but weighty. Documented or not, the astronauts' words cling like reverberations in a chamber. The lights may have been sparks, eyes tricked by radiation, debris tumbling behind. Yet the thought that crew members, trained, disciplined, sat unsettled by what they witnessed endures in memory. Even if official records close the case, the layered accounts refuse to vanish. We are left with echoes stretched across decades, reminding us that our first voyages did not unfold in complete calm, but under a gaze we can only debate. Reports of sudden silence and missing minutes add another fold. Several times transmissions seemed to cut precisely when conversations drifted toward peculiar topics. Engineers later claim technical causes, equipment overload, natural dropouts across lunar orbit. Others ask why such lapses clustered at the most charged moments, as though microphones went mute the very instant descriptions edged dangerous. With a glitch or intervention, the pattern unsettles. It suggests voices were trimmed before reaching the ground, and so the story drifts forward on its own gravity. If transmissions were cut, who cut them? Was it simply systems stressed by distance, or was it deliberate? Silence can be technical, silence can also be chosen. The question remains in orbit, unlanded. How often were the voices of Apollo travelers interrupted, and by whom? Imagine sitting at mission control during the Apollo era, rows of consoles glowing in half-light, coffee cooling in paper cups, and every ear tuned to the calm cadence of astronauts 250,000 miles away. The headset hums with chatter, routine status checks, navigation updates, when without warning the line drops. Not a gradual fade, but a sudden absence like a switch thrown. Technicians lean closer, eyes darting, fingers tapping across dials as static fills the room. Minutes pass, stretching too long for comfort. Then a voice crackles back, calm, clipped, carrying on as if nothing sharp had torn the thread. In those gaps lay the seeds of suspicion. If every word mattered, what was lost in those blank stretches of sky? Tales of missing minutes in Apollo transmissions have lingered in aerospace folklore. Some claim these lapses were harmless. The spacecraft swung behind the moon where radio signals could not reach, or equipment faltered the way it often did in that early era of spaceflight. Others describe something more deliberate. Rumours grew of alternate channels, secret audio loops outside the public feed, lines reserved for conversations that never reached the wider world. Supporters suggest that extraordinary remarks, objects seen out windows, odd lights pacing the capsule, were redirected down these hidden conduits, leaving only stilted silence for the broadcast audience. Critics counter. They explain that communication drops were common, a feature rather than error. The moon itself blocks signals when spacecraft pass behind it, creating predictable zones of dead air. At other times, ground stations simply could not hand off responsibility fast enough, producing gaps no one intended. Engineers working the consoles had letters to write and reputations to maintain. They never described anything sinister in those pauses. But believers point out how often the breaks coincide with moments of tension, as if timing itself betrayed an invisible hand. The debate has churned in cycles ever since, each side firm in its frame of reason. One of the strangest rumours involves Neil Armstrong. Some whisper he described strange craft standing near a crater, shapes unlike any known technology positioned beyond the landing zone. The story insists that his microphone went dark soon after, the supposed remarks never reaching the public ear. NASA documents deny such transcripts exist. Still, in fringe accounts, those remarks are quoted, retold, embroidered until they feel half real. Supporters claim the silence that followed was no accident but intervention, a curtain pulled quickly to keep disquieting words out of history's archive. To critics, the story is textbook hearsay, no verifiable files, no confirmable recordings. Yet the detail endures, gathered at the edges of official narrative like silt in a riverbend. Further fuel comes from speculation that entire reels of mission tape were scrubbed or sealed. Apollo produced thousands of hours of audio and video, yet patterns of missing sections have sparked rumours of hidden edits. Some say transcripts were cleaned carefully, remarks excised and bridges tacked in, so only the smoothest path reached press offices and television screens. Others go further, suggesting reels of untouched dialogue lie buried in vaults, classified not to protect espionage but to protect fragile worldviews. Critics point to the mundane chaos of archiving, data lost to budget cuts, tapes reused out of thrift, reels misfiled. Those explanations are prosaic but not untrue. Yet no matter how often the practical answer is repeated, suspicion carries a heavier weight. Imagine again the effect on human ears. You're listening live in 1969, family gathered around television, each voice from the capsule radiating across static. Then the line cuts with no warning. Silence deepens in the living room, neighbours holding breath as minutes tick by. Outside, night presses heavy, and the small glow of television is your only link to history. That pause does not vanish later when the voice returns. It lingers as a gap felt in the body, a memory of absence stronger than any phrase. In that discontinuity, the imagination begins to work. What was said that you were not meant to hear? Those who argue for censorship emphasize symbolic weight. Voices can be ordinary for hours, but the sudden removal of sound at crucial junctures plays louder than any words. Supporters suggest that if astronauts truly saw things unconventional, lights or craft, they might have reported them first and then been cautioned. Lines could be muted rapidly, spare channels switched, public feeds cut. Critics remind everyone that such speculation solves struggles with mystery by inventing plots. If transcripts are redacted or absent, that does not always imply conspiracy. History is full of gaps caused by nothing but error, oversight, or time. But suspicion thrives not because of proof, but because of atmosphere. Consider the astronauts themselves. Professionals tightly trained, aware that their speech was broadcast around the globe. They spoke in deliberate phrases, chosen with care, always aware of the hundreds of millions listening. A sudden slip into description of alien craft would have been jarring. If it occurred, and if someone judged it best removed, the act of cutting such words would be considered protective, not deceitful. That argument glows faintly in the eyes of those who stewarded NASA's records, but supporters continue to repeat. Why cut at exactly those moments? Why claim coincidence when the interruption seemed drawn to the mysterious like moths to flame? Classified archives feed the same unease. Every organization regulates sensitive recordings, some kept private indefinitely. This alone is enough to spark theories that what lies sealed away carries shocks too great for public conscience. Some whisper that private briefings were given to astronauts on their return, instructing them never to repeat what they saw. Others dismiss that outright, pointing out how crew members wrote memoirs, gave interviews, and none revealed anything exotic. Whatever the truth, silence leaves room for echo. And the echo, once it begins, is difficult to erase. In this balance, the mini payoff is clear. Whether glitch or decision, the absence of sound awakens stronger suspicion than speech itself. Missing minutes, silent tapes, clipped phrases, each detail forms a hollow space in the record, and in that space rumour seeds itself deep. It is not what is known that compels, it is the quiet gap that demands narrative. The line cuts, the breath stalls, the imagination surges. Technical glitch? Perhaps. Hidden cut? Perhaps. Either way, the void speaks with more force than clarity. If communication lapses aligned with moments too strange to broadcast, then perhaps the silence was chosen. Not static, but strategy. Not error, but erasure. Supporters find certainty in this interpretation. Critics find exaggeration, but either path agrees that the record is incomplete. What was spoken and lost between Moon and Earth will remain contested until evidence appears. And until that evidence comes, missing minutes remain a story not of words but of muteness pressed firmly into history's fabric. But whispers do not stop with Apollo, nor with cut lines inside mission control. Reports of lights and strange glows at the lunar surface stretch backward centuries, long before transmitters or tapes ever existed. If the voices of astronauts paused under strange skies, they joined a lineage much older, and we are left to ask, were Apollo travellers the only witnesses to the moon's riddles, or have its unearthly signs been caught by human sight long before their ships ever launched? When voices falter, stones speak. Whatever was kept off the airwaves ended up on the lab bench. When Apollo crews brought back their first samples, the expectation was straightforward. Dust, basalt, and fragments of rock baked brittle in the vacuum. What they found when laboratories began grinding and weighing those pieces was far less tidy. Mixed among the expected minerals were surprising concentrations of rare metals. Some samples contained titanium at levels far higher than most earthly deposits, enough to make metallurgists pause. Titanium is prized on Earth for its strength-to-weight ratio, often used in advanced manufacturing, but it is scarce in most natural crustal formations. The Moon, unexpectedly, seemed to hold it in abundance, spread across its surface in ways that did not fit preconceptions. Lab reports also noted something stranger. Among the elements traced in the samples were isotopes, uranium-236 for example, that do not appear naturally in the wild. On Earth, such isotopes are usually the byproduct of nuclear processes. Alongside it came traces of neptunium-237, another substance considered unusual outside specialized contexts. To those who reviewed the results, it posed an awkward question. How do materials that require either artificial reaction or highly specific conditions end up embedded in old lunar rock? Supporters of more speculative interpretations suggest it hints at manipulation, or at least processes human science has yet to frame fully. Critics lean to other explanations, perhaps contamination of instruments, perhaps errors in cataloguing, yet the questions linger because patterns repeat across different pieces brought back. The density of the samples added another layer of confusion. Some rocks were denser than models predicted, packed tightly with metallic fragments, while others were curiously lighter, suggesting unexpected voids within their matrix. Geologists trying to reconcile lunar mass with seismic measurements found themselves adjusting models, then adjusting again, often with frustration. What seemed simple at first, measure a rock and learn its family, turned into an uneasy puzzle, pieces jamming rather than interlocking. In research centres, conversations turned in circles. Were these materials created through extreme volcanic events? If so, where are the other markers of such volcanism? Were they captured from asteroids rich in metals? How then do we explain isotopes rare even in the asteroid belt? Each answer gave rise to further gaps. For those who supported more extraordinary speculation, the metals became anchor points. They whispered that no natural pathway could produce isotopes like uranium-236 in stable amounts. Instead, such elements must have arisen from reactors or enrichment processes. That suggestion gave rise to a deeper one. What if some parts of the Moon were assembled, seeded, or constructed? If its body had been manufactured, scattered metals might be residues from the work itself, remains of an ancient forge. Framed this way, the rocks were not just geological curiosities but signatures of fabrication left behind in plain sight. Others dismiss such thoughts, preferring to trust that new kinds of geologic activity, still barely understood, leave fingerprints we misinterpret as unnatural. Both positions circle the same fact. The anomalies refuse simple dismissal. It helped little that public fascination grew at the same time. In the 1970s, when astronauts travelled home to parades and press interviews, stories about moon rocks slipped into fringe magazines, often written more dramatically than the cautious reports deserved. Readers learned that metals impossible on Earth had been found in the dust of craters, that isotopes of impossible lineage appeared in the core of stones. Each kernel of truth became magnified. Ordinary people hearing such claims wondered if scientists had stumbled on evidence that the Moon was older than Earth, built from alien technology, or even hollow beneath its crust. Scientists in labs felt uneasy, knowing their careful charts were being translated into conspiracies they had never voiced. Yet the puzzle pieces were real enough. Some geochemists attempted to calm the debate by pointing to solar wind. Elements flung from the sun can implant themselves into surface material over eons, creating concentrations unexpected on Earth. This remains a sober explanation for certain anomalies. Others argued that cosmic bombardment or slow geologic processes unique to the Moon's environment could trap rare isotopes and metals in ways not yet familiar, but even they admitted the model did not always match the data well. The rocks stubbornly refused to slot into neat explanations. When differences between density, metal ratios, and isotopic anomalies stack on one another, skepticism builds by default. Consider the human side of those moments. A technician at a university lab weighing out powder from a lunar sample finds the expected numbers skewed far in one direction. He double-checks his instruments, repeating measurements late into the night. His pen scratches notes in margins. Irregular. Density unusual. Circled multiple times. Weeks later, when other labs report the same, his surprise shifts into deeper questions. He sits with colleagues, shuffling papers, pointing again at figures. Why here? Why in these concentrations? His body leans forward, eyes tired from long hours but unwilling to let the matter slip. His notes may never leave the lab, yet in them lies the pulse of the broader enigma. Human observation meeting data that unsettles. It is not only isolated incidents. Titanium concentrations in particular remain a point of fascination. Surveys across Lunar Maria, the dark plains visible from Earth, show levels that astonish mining specialists. Compared to Earth's crust, these quantities appear extraordinary. Supporters of speculative theory note how convenient such a resource would be for construction or machinery. Critics counter that conditions in the lunar mantle may uniquely concentrate metals in ways Earth simply does not mirror. Both sides acknowledge the oddity. The moon does not follow well-worn terrestrial rules. In this it echoes larger mysteries already outlined. A companion too large, ringing like a bell, caught in perfect alignment. Now its surface materials join the same file of strangeness. The mini-payoff is clear. Moon rocks are not inert souvenirs. They carry fingerprints of processes that stretch expectation, fragments of reality still resisting tidy classification. Some interpretations lead to breathtaking speculation. Was the moon engineered? Its skin embedded with design? Others pull back, reminding us geology often surprises once new environments are observed. Both paths share the same origin point. Samples that confound. The puzzle cannot be folded smooth, no matter how many corners researchers press flat. And from there arises the next question. If these metals, these isotopes, these densities resist natural explanation, they could be signs of something older than humanity's tools, remnants of construction, or intervention. Supporters whisper that the moon itself may be artifact as much as satellite, placed with intention. Critics dismiss, but even they concede the data complicates our picture of its nature. Every rock brought back becomes a messenger, whispering a story both ordinary and strange at once. So the samples weigh heavier than their grams suggest. They fuel not only geologic debates, but also a broader mythos. The suspicion that what orbits us is more than dead stone. If its very dust carries materials uneasy in natural sequence, then perhaps the moon's role as companion is not passive at all. Instead, the metal-rich skin might be hinting, pointing toward a larger scheme we cannot yet map. And so, speculation circles. If the moon is more than rock, assembled rather than born, then the presence of rare metals is no error. It is signature. Which invites the darker thought. If it was placed, deliberately engineered, then by whom was it placed? And for what purpose? Thread the anomalies together and one outline emerges. Not a passenger, but a placement. What if the moon isn't only stone and dust, but something crafted? A device set into orbit with quiet intention. Some whisper this theory as the Watcher hypothesis, the idea that the moon is not a companion by chance, but a sentinel arranged to watch, guide, or even manage life on Earth. It's an unsettling picture, not because it rises loudly, but because it ties together fragments already in play. Its outsized size, its improbable eclipses, its strange ring when struck, its myths of sudden arrival, and its metals that strain natural explanation. Each detail alone may be survivable as coincidence. Together they form a crooked mosaic that points toward a different possibility, the moon as object of design. The frame of this proposal shifts the moon from passenger to overseer. If the satellite was arranged, it would be less about the moon itself and more about our world beneath it. Think of the moon's role in regulating tides. The rhythmic tug pushes salt water in and out, carving estuaries, mixing nutrients, influencing weather. Ancient tides shaped coastlines where humans first learned to fish and guided migration routes of animals we depended upon. Remove the moon, and those pulses alter drastically. Add it with precise distance and weight, and rhythms fall neatly into place for life to flourish. Supporters suggest the alignment cannot simply be random. Its placement may have been calculated to steady the biosphere, ensuring Earth could support long arcs of evolution. Critics, of course, call this anthropic projection, the bias of humans reshaping facts to make themselves the target of cosmic purpose. Yet the correlation gnaws. Tides depend on this exact balance, and this balance is unique. Old myths deepen the lens rather than soften it. Cultures spoke of a sky egg, a glowing orb planted above, hatching light that changed the night. Others described a pearl, itself a remnant of the sea, placed as tribute among the stars. In parts of the Andes, tales speak of heavenly bodies stationed deliberately, their task not to illuminate but to observe the ones below. These stories, whether metaphor or memory, carry motifs of deliberate positioning. The moon is not a companion who wandered here, but a totem assigned. The symmetry of myth and the peculiarity of physics collide to offer this strange picture. Why observe humanity? Some whisper the answer lies in cycles. The phases of the moon became calendars before written numerals existed. Farmers planted, hunted, and celebrated in rhythm with its glow. Monthly cycles tied human biology and ritual to its waxing and waning. Entire systems of time, architecture, and worship grew from its predictable face. Supporters of the Watcher idea point out how convenient such perfect scheduling is. Our species lived under an ever-present timekeeper. Critics counter with the reminder that humans attach order to anything repetitive. In their view, the moon's phases are just another natural clock, chosen because it was available, not arranged because it was intended. Yet measured against the backdrop of improbability, the pattern starts to bend toward design once again. Let the frame widen. Some geophysicists note that without the moon, Earth would wobble more erratically on its axis. That wobble would plunge climates into chaos. Instead, its steady tug stabilizes our tilt, moderating seasons for consistency across thousands of years. This means agriculture, the foundation of civilization, arises within a stable cradle. If the moon is a machine, then it is not an idle eye fixed in admiration, but an instrument of balance. It governs oceans, steadies climate, and organizes cycles. The subtle suggestion follows. Perhaps it was placed to make civilization possible, a regulator for a species not yet born. Still, speculation always demands foil. Critics insist that improbability is not proof. The moon is certainly unique, but anomalies pepper the universe. Other worlds host odd ratios and unstable systems. Just because Earth's companion balances as neatly does not prove an architect placed it. Natural events, giant collisions, improbable captures can occur even if they strain imagination. Our survival may be luck, not plan. The Watcher. Hypothesis feeds on a human tendency to seek intention in what's remarkable. We see pattern and imagine designer. Whether that's projection or perception is unresolved. Yet doubt, however firm, cannot erase the chill of possibility. Supporters craft the image more deliberately. They imagine a silent structure beneath its dust, mechanisms long dormant or still humming quietly. The ringing detected by Apollo impacts becomes not geological quirk, but resonance of artificial layers. Rare isotopes shift from puzzle to evidence, signatures of construction buried in stone. To them, eclipses are theatrical by design, a cosmic signal designed to awe, to keep watchers below mindful of something larger. The moon's face always turned toward Earth becomes no accident. It is posture, constant surveillance. Such proposals edge into artistry, a stage light aligned above, ensuring the story of humanity unfolds under permanent gaze. Ancient tales echo the same motif. In Mesopotamia, texts speak of celestial regulators who set watch upon the lands. In parts of Africa, oral traditions describe the moon as a lamp hung deliberately to count the steps of men. Even Plato wrote of bodies stationed deliberately in the heavens as guardians. Whether allegory or memory, the stories repeatedly cast the moon as deliberate, purposeful. To imagine it not as wanderer but as stationed sentinel draws continuity from old imaginations to new theories. The mini-payoff, then, is clarity of alignment, each peculiar trait, that it matches the sun's face in eclipse, that it regulates tides, that it steadies Earth's tilt, that it quietly glows in tales of myth, falls into pattern under the Watcher hypothesis. Not random, but sequenced. Not chaotic, but placed. Each breadcrumb links with the next until inevitability takes shape. The moon not only supports our world, but perhaps manages or studies it. And behind that thought rises the heavier proposition, the question that stiffens instinct, the oldest question of all about watchers. If a device watches, someone must have stationed it, which raises unsettling contours. Who placed such a sentinel and why? Were they custodians ensuring our development, archivists of young civilizations, or something else altogether? Did they intend the moon as regulator and tutor, or prison and warden? This is where theories fork into dozens of branches. Some describe benevolent overseers, others speak of control. The truth is opaque, obscured beneath stone and silence, and yet the darker edge looms. If it was placed, then its builders may not be gone at all. The device would still function, turning above us each night, following its patient orbit. The possibility bears weight because it stretches present as well as past. Whatever intelligence set it above may still observe. The moon, in this frame, is no fossil relic. It is current, active, perhaps waiting. Its blank stare across every horizon at night becomes less reassuring when cast this way. The craters shift into panels. The glow turns into lens. For some, this is haunting. For others, thrilling. But together, one thought binds it. Our closest neighbour in the cosmos may not simply be part of nature's debris. It may be the oldest presence, placed to watch everything we have done since the beginning. And the watch, if it still lingers, carries an inescapable corollary. If we are being observed, we are being measured. By whom and to what end remains untold. But the sentinel still hangs steady, face locked toward Earth. And perhaps, just perhaps, the builders never truly left. Scientists measure the moon's distance with lasers bounced against small mirrors left behind by Apollo crews. The results show something subtle but steady. The moon is not anchored. Each year it drifts away from Earth by nearly 4 centimeters. The shift is invisible to the eye, smaller than the width of a finger's nail, yet recorded with precision. Across decades, the numbers align to reveal a slow retreat. Slip by slip, the familiar companion moves farther outward, leaving Earth's embrace inch by inch while continuing to face us in its locked rotation. The mechanics behind this are explained by tidal interaction. Oceans pulled by the moon drag slightly against Earth's rotation, transferring energy outward. This transfer nudges the moon away while slowing our planet's spin. It is a quiet trade. Longer days for Earth, wider orbit for the moon. Geophysicists describe it as textbook physics, unfolding as expected in an environment rich with fluid oceans. To them, there is no mystery. This is how a system evolves when gravity pulls energy through tides. No special intervention is required. Yet for those who view the moon with suspicion, the drift takes on a different hue. They see less a neutral exchange than the trace of long design, a countdown written into the very motion of sky. From a practical stance, the effects are gradual but cumulative. Coastlines shaped over millennia feel the push of tides, and each centimetre of lunar retreat gently alters where water heaps and recedes. Our day lengthens fractionally, imperceptible in a single lifetime but measurable in geologic scales. For creatures dependent on lunar rhythm, even small shifts may matter. Sea turtles rising by the moon, corals spawning by its light, migratory species attuned to its pull, all rely on predictable alignment. In time, the rhythm unspools. Farmers in coastal deltas already track changes in tidal strength, integrating them into calendars. The moon's recession plants the seeds of disruption, though the harvest lies many generations hence. Supporters of conventional science remind us that life adapts. Climate has shifted drastically before, and species survive by adjusting. Civilizations too alter their calendars, redesign their cities, rethink agriculture. The retreating moon becomes simply another slow contour of the cosmos, not crisis, but background. But conspiracists frame it differently. To them, the steady outward drift is not accident but deliberate clockwork. A satellite pulled away over ages resembles more a machine cycling through a set program than mere astrophysics. If the moon is a sentinel, perhaps its retreat is not random but an intentional closing gesture, a sign its function may one day expire. Imagine a village at tide's edge, a fisherman pressing his weight against the prow of his boat. The water no longer rises as high as his grandfather described. The salt flats shift, the pattern of harvest changes. He notes the difference in memory and tune, yet cannot imagine it stems from the entire moon shifting outward. The human scale makes the cosmic motion intimate. Global theories condense into his hands, gripping worn wood, and his eyes watching waterlines fall differently. It is here that the cosmic retreat intersects with everyday life, centimetres in distance producing ripples in culture. Critics of conspiracy caution against reading purpose into natural drift. To them, the story is misinterpretation, born from a tendency to treat unusual facts like hidden signs. Resonance, metals, eclipses, all these already push the moon into strange territory. Adding intent to its drift risks crossing into narrative rather than evidence. Some whisper that projecting motive into orbital mechanics resembles ancient superstition, explanations crafted more for comfort than accuracy. Yet to dismiss suspicion outright overlooks the persistence of curiosity. Why does the drift feel fated instead of random? Why does every minor anomaly combine to form a greater picture in human thought? Speculation turns darker when reframed as a countdown. If the moon was arranged to stabilize Earth, its slow departure could suggest an expiration of that role. As it drifts, seasons loosen, tidal rhythm weakens, axis wobble may grow. If so, the balance upon which civilization rested could unravel. Conspiracists speak of a design where humanity is given a window, an incubation bounded by the moon's steady pull. Beyond that span, conditions shift, leaving us to face harsher instability. For them, the retreat marks not only celestial mechanics, but a clock under which human history ticks. Each centimetre outward becomes a grain fallen in a silent sandglass. Sober outlooks build a different future. Astronomers predict billions of years for significant change, timescales beyond human scale. Days will stretch longer, tides shift, and eventually eclipses will fade as the moon grows too small at distance to cover the sun perfectly. But these are processes measured in spans so vast they dissolve against human calendars. Skeptics dismiss doom-laden interpretations as misplaced, arguing that our species will long have faced other challenges by then: climate, extinction, stars themselves aging. From this perspective, the moon's retreat is no alarm, just another patient gesture of the universe, and yet the symbolism endures. The idea of drift touches deep instinct. Watching something we thought fixed peel slowly outward rattles the sense of permanence. For poets and prophets, a steady retreat resonates as abandonment. For conspiracists, it suggests deliberate off-switch. For scientists, it is a case study in cosmic balance. The truth depends on which lens one holds, but each interpretation finds emotion in the same fact. The moon is slipping away. Picture the eclipse some centuries hence. The moon's disk no longer matches the sun's rim. Instead of a perfect blackout with radiant crown, the sun bleeds silver around every edge, uninterrupted. The neat theatre that has transfixed humans since dawn fades subtly. Future eyes would never know we once lived under perfect alignments. Anthropologists might note how lucky we are at this juncture, alive during a span where solar and lunar size align precisely. What seems ordinary to us may in fact be a rare interval, a cosmic coincidence timed for our rise. If the moon was placed for observation, its perfect fit could have been coded to last only so long. Once the interval passes, the stage show fades. The mini payoff is this: the moon's grip on us is not eternal. Our tides, our stable axis, our eclipses, all these are lent, not owned. With each centimetre lost, we are reminded that conditions are temporary. Life has flourished under this balance, yet the contract carries expiration built into its very equations. Whether by physics or by plan, Earth lives inside a window that will close, and the cliff lingers quietly behind it. If the moon's recession stretches too far, the watch it has kept over humanity may cease. If the sentinel was placed to observe, its vision recedes with every slip outward. And then arises the most chilling uncertainty. What happens when the watcher drifts beyond range, and we are no longer under its gaze? The moon sits close, yet remains unknowable, our neighbour across every horizon, but still carrying riddles science cannot cleanly resolve. To many, it is natural stone. To others, a myth turned to orbit. For some, an instrument bearing silent purpose. Each view clings to its own gravity. So here's where I leave it with you. Do you believe the moon is accident, story, or design? Tell me in the comments. And remember, whatever the truth, it hangs above us every night, steady and watching, a companion who has never once looked away.